learning tells you what are the important ideas, how can you get those more easily accessible within your brain so that you can use them more easily. All of these things can really enhance the time that you do spend learning so it's much more effective.
Welcome to episode 2 of the Coursera podcast, where we have conversations with renowned experts and industry leaders to explore global trends impacting the future of education and work. I'm your host Arunav Sinha, Vice President of Global Communications at Coursera. Today we are discussing the science behind learning, which is what we are all about at Coursera. Whether you're reading a new word, listening to someone explain a concept, or trying a new method of problem solving, the acquisition of knowledge is important in every stage of life. Learning is the source of human progress, but that doesn't always come easily. Sometimes we have to overcome environmental, cognitive, or motivational obstacles in order to gain new knowledge. Luckily, learning is a skill that can be practiced, which is what we are here to talk about with our guest, Dr. Barbara Oakley. Dr. Oakley is a professor of engineering at Oakland University and co-instructor of one of Coursera's top courses, Learning How to Learn. Her research focuses on the relationship between neuroscience and social behavior and has been described as revolutionary by the Wall Street Journal. Dr. Oakley is a best-selling author of several books, including Uncommon Sense Teaching, Practical Insights in Brain Science to Help Students Learn, and A Mind for Numbers, How to Excel at Math and Science. Dr. Oakley has adventured widely throughout her life. She rose from the ranks of private to captain in the US Army, worked as communications expert at the South Pole Station in Antarctica, and served as a Russian translator on board Soviet trawlers on the Bering Sea. Wow. Welcome, Barbara. I'm so happy to have you on the podcast. From my early days in Coursera, you have been an inspiration to me.
It's just been a pleasure for me to be with Coursera, and I think Coursera is an inspiration for me.
Thank you. Yeah, your course is a proof that our hunger for knowledge is as strong as ever. Learning how to learn is not just one of the most popular online courses on Coursera, but one of the most popular in the world. And I know you have such a global fan following.
It's actually kind of shocking for me because I remember standing in the basement with my husband and us looking at each other and saying, "Why are we even doing this? Is anybody ever going to watch these videos?" So what a dramatic turnaround.
Absolutely. So let's start with that. Could you tell us why you think this particular course has been so successful? Obviously, it surprised you and it surprised many, but it clearly is something that resonates with millions of people around the world.
I think there's actually a number of different reasons. It was kind of a perfect storm. For one thing, it's funny, um, and I edited it all myself. So whenever I would start to get bored, I would make sure that there was something really grabbing right at that time to keep you hooked into what's going on. One of the key instructors of the course, which is me, is actually an exemplar. I mean, I don't just talk the talk, I actually walk the walk. Oftentimes, if you haven't walked the walk of working in science, technology, engineering, and math yourself, you really don't know how learning in those disciplines is quite different from what it's hypothesized to be by theories in education and psychology. So what Terry Sadowski and my co-instructor and I do is we give solid research-based but also practically experience-based insights into how to learn really tough subjects. We can provide that bridge between, learning a new language is also quite difficult. And there's real commonalities. If you can learn a new language, you can learn mathematics and vice versa. And so we show how the brain is really, how it does that. People really want to know why, not just how to learn, but why should they use certain techniques? And when you give them those whys, they can really flourish flourish much more effectively than if you just kind of give them a few pointers.
Yeah, in fact, this is one of the most striking aspects of your course. It's just not theoretical neuroscience, it's actual tools that people can apply on daily basis to learn new concepts, new ideas, language. But on a more fundamental basis, why is it important to learn how we learn?
I remember sitting there looking at a page in a physics textbook, and I was like, I am not going to turn the page on this textbook until I understand it. Well, I sat there for like an hour and a half, just spinning my wheels, wasting my time, accidentally turned the page. It all fell into place for me. So I had really quite literally just wasted nearly an hour and a half trying to put things together. And I remember thinking at the time, why doesn't anyone give us training in how to learn more effectively? And there was some attempt at that, say 30, 40 years ago, but a lot of insights into learning at that time were really dead wrong, or they were something that it wasn't very practically useful. What we're learning from neuroscience, though, is really practically useful and gives you direct insight, and also from cognitive psychology. I remember this student coming up to me once, and he said he flunked his test. It was a statistics test I'd given on engineering statistics. And he comes up and he's like waving this test in front of me. He says, I don't understand how I could have flunked this test. I understood it when you said it in class. And part of the challenge is educators have gone so overboard in this idea that conceptual understanding is the golden key of learning. And don't get me wrong, it is important, that they've forgotten that if you don't remember what you've learned, you really have not learned it. So I think it's important to get these insights into key attributes of learning because it'll make a tremendous difference. I can't believe that people go through 12 to 16 years of their lives and never have a course on how to learn effectively, even as they're getting all this learning dumped onto them. The great thing is now we can change that. And there's all this very easy to master, sets of mental tools that can make a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, imagine what kind of multiplier effect it can have if this is part of the foundational course of how people learn early in their life. It can have a cascading impact on how they learn throughout their life and not just in their college years.
Oh, that is so true.
Yeah, and one of the things you mentioned and why that's relevant is you've been a Russian translator and then you became an engineer, and that might have heavily influenced your own decision to write a course or write books about learning. Can you tell us a bit about your own career change, what that inspired your research?
I think it was the spectacular interest in learning how to learn. Even before the first course, it had just been listed and it hadn't even begun yet, and there were over 100,000 signups. I mean, there was enormous interest, and now I'm beginning to see why. For example, we're updating our wills. We're just trying to think about the future, think about our family, make sure everything's prepared. I go to the will lawyer yesterday, and she's like, oh, you have a course in learning? And here she is, she's like my age, and she's a bit older. And she's like, I'm just overwhelmed with the new information coming out about, legal changes, how new wills, the new laws that are applicable in this area. And, I'm trying to keep my office updated. It's so important for us to learn more about how to learn effectively because we're just getting deluged with all these changes. So I was like showing her learning how to learn, and it's all out there, and and she was so excited. And this is for someone who deals with relatively older individuals. Learning it's like that in virtually everything now, and especially with the age of chat GPT, that's revolutionizing everything. And everybody is kind of feeling this need to learn more, to keep up with what's going on. And it's a fast race. And if you have some tools to help you incorporate your new learning more easily, it makes your life a lot nicer.
Absolutely. So let's come to the meat of the conversation. From a neurological perspective, what do you believe is the most misunderstood aspect of learning? And how can we address this misconception in our education system?
Well, it is that idea that the only key to learning is conceptual understanding. It doesn't matter. You don't need to remember anything because you can always look it up. Would I be able to speak Spanish if I always just use Google Translate? I mean, I can't code if I'm always just looking things up and using something else to do all the thinking for me. For example, even simple things like nurses who, seemingly simple things, but they have to make calculations to see what kind of or what your medication dosage is. You can't just rely on, oh, I punch in a number on the calculator. If you don't have a ballpark of that what that number should be in your own mind, it's so much easier to make a mistake on what you're prescribing for someone. There's certain key elements of knowledge that we have to have within our brain. We can't outsource that. When we're acquiring expertise in any area, what we want to do is get those key concepts within our brain so that we can much more easily access them and use them. People might say, why should I memorize a hotkey if I'm a programmer? I could just do it more slowly. To be an expert, you're fast. You're able to do things like magicians can do. So hotkeys, you should know those inside and out. Anyway, learning about learning tells you what are the important ideas. How can you get those more easily accessible within your brain so that you can use them more easily? What is more peripheral? What can you leave outside? Learning about learning a little metacognition, kind of stepping back and looking at your learning. All of these things can really enhance the time that you do spend learning so it's much more effective.
So that's one of the most common refrain I'm hearing these days. Like you talk to anyone, they will say, "Oh, why do I need to learn this? Because I can ask ChatGPT; it can produce a copy for me." Do you really see with this advancement that humanity at large, especially the youth, can become lazy in terms of learning new skills and just over rely on technology to produce outputs for them?
So, yes, I do. And we've seen a little of this happen before. From the 1930s to the 1970s, worldwide, there's good research evidence that IQ scores increased all around the world. And it's thought that they increased because education opportunities were increasing for people worldwide. But in 1970, there was this inflection point. All of a sudden, IQ scores started going down. What happened in 1970? The calculator came out. And people started being told, well, you don't need to learn to calculate this stuff. You can always just look it up. So people did not internalize the multiplication tables. They moved away from phonics in reading. So if education was responsible for the sharp rise before, there's pretty good evidence that education was also sort of correlated with that decline afterwards, and perhaps in a causal sense, because education began to move away from this idea of, yeah, you've got to have it inside yourself as well as something that's outside of you. It's just important that we realize that how we teach and how we learn is something that makes a big difference. What I think is fantastic is people often don't realize the opportunities available from online learning. Julius Yigo is my favorite athlete of all time, and he is from Kenya. Kenya is known for its long distance runners, but Julius always wanted to learn how to throw the javelin. There's no javelin throwing coaches in all of Kenya. He couldn't afford to go overseas. So he started watching world-class coaches of the javelin on YouTube 98% of the time, just by watching these coaches and going out and practicing on his own. He became the world champion in throwing the javelin. So this is an indicator that we can learn things we would never have thought we could learn online. I've watched, like world famous, authorities on online teaching, and they'll be like, online teaching, of course, it's not quite as good as face to face. And I'll see them, and they'll be talking online for half an hour with a picture of the book, of their book beside them. And that's all they have for half an hour. And I'm like, well, no wonder you think online teaching isn't so good. You don't know how to teach online. But having really good teachers online, it is a miraculous thing that is really, really lifting boats all around the world.
In fact, you symbolize what a student's spirit of learning should be because you have spoken at length about your initial challenges with mathematics. What advice would you give to someone who feels they're just not good at math or believes that they don't have a math brain?
I certainly didn't think I had a math brain. I mean, in seventh grade, we moved from rural Texas to right outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and they were suddenly far ahead of me in the multiplication tables. And I just was like, well, I can't learn very fast. I don't really like math anyway. I'm not very good at it. So I flunked my way through elementary, middle, and high school math and science, which is really ironic since I'm now a distinguished professor of engineering. And I love math. And I love science. And the thing to do is to start low. When I decided, I was age 26, all I had was a bachelor's degree in Slavic languages and literature, and no recruiter was knocking at my door to say, yeah, we just got to have your, Slavic languages and literature skills. And I looked at some of the things that people were doing, like my colleagues who were West Point engineers, they were doing exciting, they were getting great, interesting job offers. And I just thought, well, wait a minute. If I love adventure. So why don't I try a new adventure of the mind and see if I can learn in math and science? So here I was, 26 years old. I started with the lowest possible level, which was remedial high school algebra at the university. Couldn't even get credit for it. Slowly began climbing my way upwards. Back in that time frame, I had to give everything up and just go to the university and hope I could do it. Now you can take courses and gradually, just check things out and not have to completely throw away whatever else you're doing and take years off and so forth. You can kind of dabble in it and go at your own pace. And having these courses available online now is a fantastic thing. So I say start low, give yourself time. If you make mistakes and aren't as good as the best people in the class, well, rejoice, because actually that open way you have of learning can sometimes allow you to see things that the super smart race car learners cannot see. So just keep going and kind of have faith and set up a system. It's the time you put in per day. That's what really counts, not oh yeah, I've got to finish this chapter in a day and this, and so forth. Just set up an amount of time so it's the process, not the goal.
Yeah, outstanding advice. I think that's going to be so valuable to people who are trying to cram everything in one go and get overwhelmed and then feel defeated by the subject. So, having a system is absolutely key. In fact, many people believe that there is an expiration date for learning, especially when it comes to complex subjects. What's your take on adult learning and how can one cultivate a lifelong learning mindset, especially at a time when the global forces are impacting every aspect of our life?
I suppose the expiration date for me is when I'm on my deathbed, as far as learning goes. I just want to be learning for the rest of my life. There really is no expiration date. When you are 80 years old, you are still having new neurons born every day in your hippocampus, and those will help you to learn effectively. And they'll also make you feel happier. So that's the funny thing that people often don't realize is that new learning helps new neurons, survive, thrive, and grow. And those new neurons also help boost your spirits. It's a pretty fantastic thing. I mean, you just don't want to turn into one of those old curmudgeons who thinks they know everything and won't listen to anybody, and they don't have to learn anything new because, they know it all. I mean, you don't want to be that person. And it's actually so fun to be learning in some of these new openings now in technology. They're so exciting. And just make sure to carve out a little time for your family. The Queen Mother once said, "Work is the rent you pay on life." And so we do have to do our daily work, but try to wedge that new learning in there, because you'll find that it'll make you happier as well as sometimes be a real help for your job.
Now, who could have thought that learning is actually key to enduring happiness? It is difficult to correlate that, but it's absolutely the way you explained it is an eye opener for me as well as would be for the audience. That brings me to an age old conundrum that people often face is how important is passion or interest in a subject when it comes to effective learning? Is it even possible to become proficient in something even if you lack passion for it initially?
Absolutely, yes. I am here as a living testimony. I mean, not only did I lack passion, I still remember in high school, like I was flunking chemistry, and my parents were like, "Go see Mr. Fry, he will help you." So I go see Mr. Fry, and I was the most obnoxious student ever. I was just like, "Okay, come on, see if you can put that chemistry in my brain, because I know you're not going to be able to do it, because I hate it." And the thing is, I ended up falling so in love with chemistry when I began to study it in college, when I decided to change my brain. I almost became a chemist. Some top neuroscientists phrased it beautifully when they said that learning can take time, and passions develop about what you're good at, but some things take longer to get good at. So giving yourself the time to, and just be like, "Yeah, I don't like it now. How can, what's a question I can ask myself that maybe I'm a little curious about?" And just get into, like, don't think about the big picture of, "I hate this thing." Just think about, okay, yeah, but what's one little thing I'm curious about? And start following those breadcrumbs. And as you gradually follow, the time will come and you'll start finding you're getting better. And then, by golly, you've just backed yourself into something that you, to your surprise, can like. It's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, so that self agency seems like a vital aspect of learning and developing that resilience. But a lot of us also struggle with procrastination. And from your own studies and experiences, what are some of the actionable strategies that individuals can implement to overcome this hurdle?
Oh, I am a master procrastinator myself. Them's my people. It's funny, when I speak all around the world, wherever I go, it's like the Finns are like, "No, no, we're the best procrastinators." The Kazakhs are like, "No, no, it's us. We can procrastinate better than anybody." But actually, everybody everywhere procrastinates, because when you're working on one thing, you're not working on another thing. And that other thing may well be the more important thing to be working on. So, what I often recommend is just very practical. Use what's called the Pomodoro technique, which was developed by Francesco Cirillo in the 1980s. And I salute him eternally, because well, maybe I don't, because I get thousands of emails from people saying, "That Pomodoro technique, that is so good." And so it really helped change my life. So if it makes that big a difference for so many people, it will make a big difference for you as you're listening to this. And it's a very simple technique. You just put away all distractions, so nothing popping up on your cell phone or your computer. Good luck though if you have a 2-year-old at home. And then you set a timer for 25 minutes and work as intently as you can for those 25 minutes, realizing that your brain is going to try and trick you sometimes. It's going to be like, oh, wait a minute, I needed to go and look at this. And you just, if it's critical, make a little note on the side, but keep your focus on whatever you're supposed to be doing. The reality is anybody can focus for 25 minutes. And when you're done, if that 25 minutes has been spent learning something new, take a 5-minute break where you do not pick up your cell phone. You instead allow it congeal in your mind. You want that information to consolidate. So that means, walking around a little bit, or maybe having a cup of tea and staring out in the air. You can do something manual like sweeping a floor or something. But 5 minutes for that new learning to gel. It's almost like you can feel it, your hippocampus reinforcing that information in long-term memory. And then after that half an hour is done, you can either do another Pomodoro or you can go off and do something else. But this is it's not like that 25 minutes is sacred, but it's a really good period of time. When you even think about something you don't like or don't want to do, it activates feelings of pain in the insular cortex. That 25-minute period allows you to get past that feeling of pain, which lasts about 20 minutes, gets you into the flow of things. You can continue if you want, but you also want to be aware that when you do take that little break, it can allow you to get a little refreshing perspective on whatever you've been learning about. And so if you go too long without a break, you're not getting that refreshing perspective, and sometimes you can end up spinning your wheels.
Wow, you practically shared an entire blueprint for learning. And I think that's what the audience is going to find very useful. As we move towards the end of the podcast, a couple of capping off questions. With all the advancement in technology and especially neuroscience, where do you see the future of education headed, and what roles teacher and technology will have with regard to self paced learning?
I think that gradually we will be moving more towards, well, let me just step back a minute. They called 2012 the year of the MOOC. And then everybody after that time was like, oh no, that was just all hype. But if people had paid attention back in 2012 to what was going on, instead of, being antagonistic towards online teaching, but they'd embraced it, we would have been very well prepared worldwide for the COVID epidemic when it did come out. So my hope is there are certain countries, for example, Singapore around the world, who have recognized that the future of education also means that we need to be prepared for the inevitable bad stuff that's going to happen, like epidemics, completely unforeseen. So, my hope is that in the future, there will be more attention paid to the vital importance of also having online teaching mechanisms, good online teaching, because unfortunately, because they had ignored the value of online teaching when it first really emerged in 2012, they didn't really learn how to teach online well. And so it made it so that, schools around the world were really suffering when there was the shutdown with COVID. So anyway, I do think that the future of education will harden the system so that we're more capable of handling disruptions that occur. It will also make it so that there's more individualized instruction, so that students who learn in different ways or learn more quickly will be able to progress more quickly through the educational system. So I think there's actually a lot of flowers emerging in education now, and I think there's just a super bright future for lots of different innovative new ideas. And I think that large language models are really going to contribute to innovation in ways that it is hard for us to imagine right now, just as when computers came out, back in the 80s, it was hard for us to imagine what the real impact was going to be long term. So it's a cool place to be in.
Absolutely. So, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much for spending time with us, Barbara. And people need to keep in touch with you so that you can track what's the latest, what kind of concepts and new ideas that you've been sharing through your course and otherwise as well. And you travel around the world too. So, where can our audience find you if they would like to know more about your work?
Oh, so if they sign up for Learning How to Learn, usually once or twice a month, I send out a Cheery Friday email, and it has lots of insights on new learning and just kind of personal things that I think are cool about the world of education. Or they can always go to my website, www.barbaraoakley.com.
Thank you, Barbara. Great chatting.
Thank you, everyone.
A big thanks to Dr. Oakley for joining us today. It was so valuable to be reminded that learning is a never ending adventure with absolutely no expiration date. During a time when technology is changing the way we work so drastically, the ability to master new skills and concepts is more important than ever. Coincidentally, both my son and I are in the process of learning Spanish, and I'm excited to share some of Dr. Oakley's tips with him. I know we will both definitely benefit from Pomodoro method of procrastination. If you enjoyed the episode of the Coursera podcast, please rate, review, and share. Until next time, I'm Arunav Sinha. Thank you for tuning in and always keep learning.